United.
Hello, everybody. Good afternoon and welcome to our session. Our session is use discussion on AI, on misuse of AI and IoT technologies. Well, I guess the title speaks for itself. Our objective here is to have a discussion on how cybersecurity is concerned in the debates regarding artificial intelligence and Internet of Things. Our objective is to understand what are international standards that could apply to IoT and AI, what are good practices that could be developed, and what are the current challenges that we still face in this field. We have chosen to have a special youth perspective on the issue because we understand that young people are often an underrepresented group in the debates about artificial intelligence and the Internet of Things. Even though we are active users of those technologies, perhaps the biggest group of users of such technology. So our idea here is to have a discussion with a specific focus on youth, but that doesn't mean that you have to be young to be part of this panel. This is an open discussion in which everybody's opinion is very open. So we have 4 panelists today. One of them is going to be online, but we have 3 of them here with us today. So I'll briefly introduce them. So we have Sávyo Morais, directly from Brazil. He's a vice chair of the DC ISSS working group on IoT security by design, has a master's degree in computer science. He's a professor of the Federal Institute of Rio Grande do Norte in Brazil, and his work focuses on supporting the deployment of existing cybersecurity standards and best practices for IoT, as well as identify and bridging those gaps. We have Nicolas Fiumarelli, directly from Uruguay. He's also a computer engineer, graduated from the University of the Republic of Uruguay, currently studying computer science, also at the same institution. Nicolas is part of ISOC Uruguay chapter, and he's a co-founder of the Use IGF Uruguay initiative. He's also an activist on several topics, including emerging technologies, such as quantum communication and IoT. We also have Ihita Gangavarapu from India. She's a research scholar at the IIT Hyderabad, India, working on Internet of Things, security and smart cities. She's also part of ICT standardization bodies and also a member of the ITU Generation Connect Visionaries Board and a funding member of Use IGF India. And we have Oarabile Mudongo here close to me. He's an AI policy extern and recipient in the Center of AI and Digital Policy. He has previously worked as a policy researcher with ICT Africa, and currently pursuing a master's degree in automated facial recognition system and algorithm governance. So just to briefly explain the dynamics of our session today, we're first going to have a round conversation within our panelists today. So each one of them is going to speak for 10 minutes on AI and IoT. So we're first starting with AI and then moving on to IoT. And after that, we're going to have an open discussion with all the participants using a platform called Mentimeter. I don't know if you're familiar with that platform. We're going to project some questions here in the screen, and you're very much invited to interact with us on that. So I'm passing now the word to Oarabile Mudongo, who will be speaking about AI first.
Yeah, I mean, thank you so much for the opportunity and to be part of this dialogue. Really here to just get to learn from everyone and, get to understand how we can address this kind of issues together. As my colleague has already mentioned, I've been working around issues related to artificial intelligence for quite some time, including the project around AI and AI surveillance in Africa, as well as how the implications of AI, particularly affecting, African societies around, intersections around digital inequality and how we can address those implications. But coming back to the topic for today, I want to believe that, this session really opens up a dialogue where we are able to discuss, emerging and cross-cutting issues around trust, security, and the stability of AI technologies. And I think it really opens the need for us to start really thinking about assessing and addressing the serious risks that this technology poses to human rights, privacy, and also, the potential implications around how they perpetuate digital divide, particularly from a global South perspective. But I think about, AI in the context of, technology that promotes public good in the public service, where technology modernizes processes, where where policies also speak to issues in a meaningful way to benefit how society operates. In addition to that, I kind of really see AI evolve in a way that magnifies our ability and how society's ability to use, personal information in ways that can really intrude personal privacy interests by raising, the analysis of personal information to new levels of power and speed. And such an example of this is basically how facial recognition systems offer this kind of preview of the privacy issues that we are really trying to grapple with today. For example, we've been seeing different states across Africa adopting AI-driven surveillance technologies, and most of their, benefits and purposes for those technologies are kind of really skewed. You can't really differentiate what's legal and what's illegal there. I really wanted to think of this topic as more or less, where AI technology is really transforming the areas of our society and how it opens these new avenues. I think it has also shown us there's fresh possibilities of simplifying our lives in the society, but more importantly, how this technology can also deepen, these existing inequalities, particularly those that have access to technologies and those that don't have. But more importantly, I think speaking in the context of how this technology affects the society, we need to start thinking about addressing these issues that within the community where young people are involved in this, policy dialogue, where they are given a space at the table to start contributing towards policy development processes that speaks to artificial intelligence. But then giving a little bit of a background issue to how we've gotten to really start talking about the nitty-gritties of how AI perpetuates digital inequality, or possibly perpetuate digital inequality, and some of the possible implications in the society. I think so far the developments in AI have been predominantly been driven more by private sector, and of course there has been some growing interest by different governments to start, which is opening up new conversations to really start thinking about how can we develop AI strategies that speaks to the needs that we see in our societies. And I think these strategies will subsequently, help improve and grow governance processes in our governments as well. But while the above, such kind of developments are really can be seen as positive steps towards addressing these issues, I think we need to also address the gaps that we see also in our societies in terms of how the power of AI to augment skills, and also, the resource deficit that we have been witnessing and seeing also, particularly in developing countries where we have these technologies being developed and changing how society operates, but at the same time having this kind of imbalance between those that don't have the proper skills to really meet the standards of the industry. But in the context of, COVID-19 pandemic also, we've been seeing, various developments being established by a number of governments where as a way or a measure to contain the spread of the virus, including the launch of digital contact tracing technologies. But towards these technologies, we also note the overlying aspect of big data, where these platforms are basically, gathering data from users, possibly having the implications of, datafication and, this overlying digitalization we are seeing in the society. And what's really scary about these developments is the current data privacy legislation landscape we are seeing also in developing countries, where there isn't really much work being done to develop, effective data privacy frameworks to protect user privacy and issues like that. But in terms of really, thinking about the key challenges here that we are seeing within the AI realm is perhaps, issues around monopoly and centralization of, big powers within our private sector and big technology companies, where only a handful of tech giants have access to resources and they're able to build AI technologies that are data intensive, and they're not really being accountable to anyone. And the second challenge I think we've been seeing in the industry is maybe around issues of data privacy, which I've already alluded to, and AI governance. We lack, proper frameworks to regulate the use of AI technologies, which might have, long-term implications around bias and discrimination, which of course we have already, witnessed such kind of incidents. The other thing I think we need to look at here is perhaps, addressing issues of industry norms, where really big companies that are developing AI technologies and those that are actually, adopting them in the society, they kind of really, we need standards that embed the systems we need the systems to be embedded in societal values and norms, where they respect, privacy issues there, and perhaps, standards like that around accountability and transparency as well. But in terms of really, interesting developments that also we have been seeing in terms of how these challenges are emerging in Africa, particularly, there has been some emerging regional initiatives supporting, strong data governance policies that enable, data innovation. For example, as recommended from the African Union digital transformation strategy to support Africa's vision for growth in the digital era. And what's really interesting about such kind of strategies is that, some of these advancements they're likely to shift the dynamics of data and power, and how, industry operates and how governments operate or adopt these technologies. So in terms of really approach, I think I'll touch base that. I can give it to the next speaker.
Thank you very much, Oarabile. From your speech, I thought what you mentioned about digital skills gap is a really important aspect that sometimes is neglected in the discussions about AI and IoT, because when we're talking about cybersecurity, we're usually focusing on the corporate side, on the technical side, and we forget about the user. And when we're talking about the use perspective on IoT and AI, it's really important to discuss that as well, because in a lot of cases, the young person is the end user, and that person does not necessarily have the skill to protect his or herself online. So that's also a very important point that you touched upon. Well, I'm passing now the word to Nicolas Fiumarelli, who's also talking about AI.
Yes, thank you so much, Juliana. Well, I will go deep in a little more so you to understand what are the youth concerns about artificial intelligence. Because as you know, youth are a very active internet user. We know that 70% of the population using internet is a youth. And well, they have their worries because sometimes they are activists. So what has AI that is like this biased thing of AI that you'd identify, right? So I will start discussing a little or defining what is artificial intelligence so you can have a sense of the different approaches and different things. For example, AI can be described as the technique that enables a computer or a computational systems to mimic any type of intelligence, right? But what is intelligence, right? Is that the machine is capable of solving specific problems like the humans, but well, today only very well-defined problems can be solved by these artificial intelligence systems. So, but most of the people talked about artificial intelligence, but there is another concept that is a machine learning, right? Well, the machine learning is a particular type of artificial intelligence that refers to algorithms and techniques that learn by themselves confronted with this data, right? So Oarabile talked about this big data concept and all these observations and interactions that the machine has with the surrounding world are that would able to construct these specific representations of the reality to give some things to the environment, right? So these specific characteristics enable us to use computers for new tasks that we never or will be like impossible to code manually. So what happened? There are different application areas of the artificial intelligence. We have heard about the speech recognition, for example, or the personalization of websites based on user interests. So email filtering, applicants screening, this clinical diagnosis. So a lot of things that has risks, but at the same time has some bias things. So we will talk a little more about this because there is a full process that the artificial intelligence use. There is a collection of this data, right? By people, surveys, pictures, maybe comments on chats. So these chatbots learn a lot from the users and try to pre-process data or try to figure it out some patterns so they can respond or at least have some representation of the reality and try to do the thinking of a human in terms of responding to that, right? So there are like this pre-processing data. So the training of the machine learning is based on a lot of data, like the big data. But this model, the model that use the machine learning or the artificial intelligence inside is like a black box, right? Sometimes it is very difficult to explain what the algorithm has decided or how the algorithm decides something. And this is terrible because, for example, there is a thing that is very, is a full conversation now, that is a lethal autonomous weapon systems at some frontiers that use facial recognition. And what happens if this machine shoot to people? There are several things that are very like ethical things, right? That we need to really start to talk. It's like the nuclear weapons. If we don't talk about that or know who has the power of these technologies, we will be behind. So it's not a matter of controlling these technologies, but to know where is this power. So we need to control this. And there are some challenges, right? Because this data collection could be based on incorrect or biased collection of things, wrong data documentation. It is very known that, for example, chatbots began to be like racists because it's all based on the data that they collect. So, for example, another example is the facial recognition. It is known that for the color skin is very important because it's an inherent part of the mathematical inside of the facial recognition, for example. One consequence is that 30% of Black people is mismatched with other ones. So maybe if you go to a stadium or something, you want to enter in a soccer game, and they identify you as a bad person, but you are not that person. It's other one, but the algorithm confused. Like this 30% is very bad, and so there is a disadvantaged group there. So same happened with the chatbots. Sometimes, for example, the interpretation could be some different interpretation. For example, it is known that for women and for men, there are several phrases used in comments in Facebook, or when the algorithm use this big data. For example, it's more common that say that, yeah, she need to take care of the kid, or he is the strongest one. So these comments, these things that the algorithm they process all the time could have an underrepresentation, and it descends with a bias thing, right? So machine learning models can become very complex, and artificial intelligence decisions are hard to understand. So the lack of this transparency, as Oarabile was mentioning, may lead to a lack of accountability and liability. So the other problem is the explainability, right? If an autonomous vehicle take a decision, for example, if you have you will have an accident because of the speed is calculated, and you don't have chance to avoid this situation of an accident. So the car recognizes the situation, and they need to do some decisions, right? Maybe turning to the left or turning to the right. Imagine the situation that it's not possible to avoid the accident. So you will turn to the left or to the right. Maybe at the left are 3 people, but at the right is 1 people. But what happened is, I don't know, Donald Trump is on the right. So you will kill, sorry for the word, like the 3 people. So these things need to be decided, and someone need to explain what was the decision of the algorithm. So the AI explainability is something that we need to be taken in mind, because will be like the future of these things. So that is enough, I think, for introducing like some examples or some concepts of this AI misuse, or at least these bias things that could happen with artificial intelligence.
Thank you very much, Nico. I think you tackled very important issues regarding user privacy and the biases that can come from the misuse of machine learning techniques. We're passing the word now to Ihita. Yeah, I see her in the screen. Yeah, she's going to be talking about IoT.
Yes, thanks a lot, Juliana. So before I talk to you guys about IoT, I would actually want to link up IoT and artificial intelligence, and then move on to understanding as to why security of Internet of Things is important, and what are the challenges as to why is it so difficult to secure them, right? So before we start off, let's think of a scenario. Let's think of the human body, right? We have senses, we have sound, we sense sound, light, touch, smell, and all of these senses, that we have, and then all this sensed data is sent throughout the body through a network of nerves. And in the nerves in the brain, in the nerves, right? The nerves in the brain, they process this data, and based on whatever action is taken, like for example, you have a movement of a muscle, so that is your actuation. So this combination of the sense data to a processing of the sense data to get some insights, after which taking an action or the actuation, is a combination of IoT and AI, which becomes the complete system. So that is how I would want to explain how IoT and AI is linked, and that's the reason why we have incorporated both these topics in today's session. Now let's think of a situation where you have a thermostat and a manual thermostat. So basically, if it gets hot in the room, you have to manually go and adjust the temperature based on your comfort. Now, if you were to introduce sensors, right? If you were to convert into an Internet of Things or IoT device, you will introduce a bunch of sensors. Like you'll have a temperature sensor, you'll have a humidity sensor, you'll have a carbon dioxide sensor. So all these sensors will collect the sense data and accordingly make changes. Like for example, reduce the temperature if it's getting too hot in the room. Further, machine learning can be used on this data. If, like, for example, if you have a threshold on the carbon dioxide level, the level of CO2 in a room can determine the occupancy of the room. And that could be something that ML can do. These kind of insights and predictions is where machine learning and artificial intelligence can come into play. So we are seeing, of course, an exponential increase in the manufacturing, the deployment, and also the usage of IoT systems. And with IoT, we are entering this realm of cyber-physical systems. And what cyber-physical systems are basically integration of computation, networking, and physical processes. So basically, any changes that are made in the physical world. So if I were to give you another example of this, right? If you are looking at a swimming pool, and in the swimming pool, there is an actuator that works, and actuation happens. The actuation here is the opening or closing of a valve. So based on the chlorine level, the actuation happens. Let us say that this entire system gets affected, like through a malware or any kind of cyber attack. Then even if the chlorine level in the water, so the valve might not act properly, and then it's going to release a lot of chlorine. So it can affect the person's health and also can lead to danger or loss of life. Another example, like my colleagues just mentioned, was an autonomous car, driverless car. So the sensors, they are used to detect the obstacle. In our case, could be a human being. And if the system is compromised, the car will hit the person, right? So when you're looking at IoT systems, it is really important that to secure these, especially because IoT systems are very, intertwined with our lives now at the rate at which they are increasing and being deployed. So when we're looking at the threats in general of IoT, you're looking at two different dimensions. One would be the device itself gets compromised because of, let's say, having a weak password, for example, or gets malware through the software update. The other vector that we have is when the IoT device becomes a threat vector. So it is used to launch other. And most of you have heard IoT devices like baby monitors, cameras were attacked because of weak passwords, and they were used as threat attack vectors to attack the DNS server DIN through a denial of service attack. So multiple requests were sent till all the resources were depleted of DNS and it could not respond. So it's a distributed denial of service attack that was performed. So these are just some examples that can have very detrimental effects on our lives and on our societies. And that's why it's really important to secure IoT devices. Now, one might ask, why don't we just secure them? Because if security can save lives, can make it all easier, why don't we just secure it? IoT devices are also called resource-constrained devices, as in they have constraint on the storage overhead in terms of processing. So this makes it difficult to do any kind of encryption. Let's say, for example, if your device is sensing temperature data and you would want to securely send it over the wireless interface, then you will have to encrypt it. So the encryption has to happen on board the IoT device. So that will take up a bunch of memory or storage. And that is a challenge with IoT device. Then the other challenge we have in terms of cost, functionality versus cost. You would want to buy a low-cost IoT device for the same function. So lots of manufacturers use low-cost sensors. So that is another issue or challenge. Then in terms of deployment scenario, so if you're talking about smart cities, or if you're just talking about IoT devices deployed in remote areas, for example, to sense the moisture levels in an agricultural field, then these are some places where physical tampering of the device is also possible. And then you might not go every time to manage the device. So there's also, and the other issue is that once you're deploying in such remote places and just talking to other devices or your router or to your cloud remotely, then there are chances of a man in the middle attack or somebody eavesdropping your personal information or your data. Then the other challenge we have is the threat landscape. So when you're talking about IoT device, we're talking in terms of the device itself, then you're talking in terms of the communication network, then you're talking, and the data goes to the cloud. So your landscape is very distributed. So securing every interface becomes a challenge. And the last one, as per, from my understanding and my research, is the fragmentation in the standards. So we don't have a consistency in the standards across the globe for IoT security, as in terms of what are the requirements to secure IoT devices and how should it be done? What are the certification mechanisms? What are the labeling mechanisms? So there's a fragmentation. And this is a topic that I'll be picking up in a couple of minutes after, in the second half of today's session. And this is where I believe that, young people become an important stakeholder, as rightly pointed out by my friends Nicolas and Juliana earlier. So that it's important, like when we're designing standards, to have an open, transparent, and multi-stakeholder model, so that everybody's perspective, the manufacturers, the retailers, the consumers, everyone's perspective is on board. And this is where the young person should also have a say into as to how the standards for security should be designed for IoT systems. Thanks.
Great, thank you so much. Now we have our last speaker, Sávyo, who's also going to be talking about IoT.
Thanks, Juliana. So good afternoon, good evening, good morning, everywhere you are. I'm gonna talk a bit about one specific use case of IoT, that is the home IoT scenario. This was my research during. This has been my research during the last 3 years, and we have some concerns in the scenario, in the ongoing, in the current model of operation in the home IoT devices, is that most part of the devices available in the market have the cloud-based operations, which means that even if I'm in my house and I want to switch off my smart bulb, I have to connect to the device's manufacturer, and it sends back the request to the device. When I say this in technical terms, it's not that bad. But in different words, the manufacturer of your smart bulb knows when you are sleeping, when you wake up, when you are watching movies, so you set down your light. So this is really complicated in the point of view of privacy and other things. When we think, for example, in scenarios where we can many other sensors from the same manufacturer, for example, in one home, that has this type of operation architecture based in the cloud. So if you have, for example, moving sensors, switching lights, your TV, your music player, and so on, the manufacturer itself can have deep inferences about your routing and your what you like to do. So more than this, there is also one problem in reliability. So please imagine that your door locker is connected to the internet and uses this type of communication. So your internet goes down, and you cannot leave or get into your home. So this is also a problem, and you just can't rely in this type of device. And more other things, not considering only the individual scenario, but the collective scenario. For example, using also, for example, the misuse of artificial intelligence algorithms. Someone can have inferences about the routing of one community, about any other things, considering just even dropping this data from the network flow. Someone, for example, in ISP that runs some type of algorithm that can have inferences in one type of services based in the request those devices do to the manufacturer website, the service provided by the manufacturer. So we have also these collective risks and others. So some devices also allow you to operate them only in the home network, but this is the minor part actually. But even considering the exclusive usage of this type of devices, this type of communication, sorry, in the local network, we also have some problems, still have problems in developing the standards for communicating, for configuration, and mostly for configuration because the end user is not an expert in security or even in mostly they almost don't know how to connect the things to the Wi-Fi and then start using. So the point why people are having the preference for this type of operations, cloud-based operations, is that it makes easier the configuration of the device for both operating the device from your home or from outside the home. And this is mostly because of the usage of the network and the address translation caused by the use of IPv4 that hides the device that are behind the home router, the home gateway. So it's hard to you for a end user or even for me, depending on if the ISP use CGNAT. So this kind of things also reinforces the use of this cloud-based operations. But coming back to the point of configurations, we also have some protocols that support this type of thing, but the problem is that they are also insecure. So we have, for example, a universal plug and play and the PCP that supports this type of operation, the auto configuration of devices, but it have like 10 or 5 years that we know they are insecure. So we still don't have this kind of protocols for the devices or even for the users that are communicating, for example, or connecting and configuring like by a user interface, by a smartphone app. There is also one problem. And moreover, we also have problems for example, if you have one security surveillance camera in your house and you have to access it by your browser, for example, you still can't trust in the HTTPS certificate because this kind of operations in the current browsers associate the certificate that encrypt the whole communications with a host name, a DNS name, and this kind of DNS name has to be public in the public DNS. You can't have, for example, a mycamera.local domain name for your camera and associate it to a TLS certificate for using HTTPS communication and then encrypted communication with your camera or with any other sensors. So these are the main problems. We have some other things that we can talk more later, but this is a starting point. So thank you.
Thank you. Just commenting briefly on what you said and also what Ihita said earlier. I thought it was super interesting how you mentioned that one of the problems with IoT security is, manufacturers using cloud services to make those services available. But sometimes the companies that are employing this kind of devices, they're not really concerned about what's behind the architecture of IoT. So they're only concerned about reducing the cost of the devices so that they are not really worried if those devices, they come with the proper security or if they are properly secured in terms of the architecture in which they are involved in. We are now technically moving on to our Mentimeter session, which is a space for you to participate in our discussion. However, I saw that there are some messages in this chat. So before we move on to the Mentimeter activity, I just wanted to give the floor maybe to 2 people, 1 on site and 1 online. If you have any questions, feel free to either unmute yourself if you're online, or just come to the mic. Well, 2 people, so we don't take much time. So if you have any questions, those people that are typing in the chat, feel free to do so. Yeah. Oh, I can just pass the mic. Yeah.
I'm already closer to you. So basically, it's on? It's on? Are you able to hear me? So basically, I've followed the discussion. However, there are 2 terms that are being used interchangeably, IoT and AI. The question is, when does IoT becomes AI? Because as you are aware, AI is it's the device being able to learn and operate independently decisions based on its data that is being fed. There comes a time when an IoT device at some point learns and understands the situation and its operations to an extent whereby it now operates autonomously. That now becomes AI. So my question is, when I've partially answered it, I know, but I want an answer from the panels. When does IoT becomes AI? Because to discuss IoT in a silos, whether you like it or not, you're going to bring AI. When you discuss AI, whether you like it or not, you have to bring IoT. So in these 2 terms, when does IoT graduates into AI? Thank you.
I think I'll give the floor to whoever wants to start.
Yes. Well, when we prepare this session, we don't think in the idea of mixing the AI and the IoT like the artificial intelligence inside the sensor, right? We just say like on one side we saw the IoT security, on the other side we saw the artificial intelligence misuse. That maybe that word we have received some criticism about that, but the idea behind is that we know that there are like bias things or safety things in the artificial intelligence that need to be solved or at least to be achieved. So, but yes, I think that it could be a combination of IoT and artificial intelligence in some manner. I don't really know that, really think that maybe the intelligence of the artificial intelligence or the decisions will be like inside the sensor because of the capacity and the constraint nodes. But maybe at some kind of time, all these sensors data came to a gateway, and this process that will operate or process all this data could take some decisions based on artificial intelligence. So just to clarify that, I don't know if you want to ask.
No, not really an answer, but just to reply to his question as well. I think they exist interchangeably because they can be, that's why they are termed as emerging technologies. But what's really interesting perhaps is what really distinguishes these 2 is that, IoT deals with, how devices interact with the internet, whereas, AI is about the data being fed in these devices to operate. I'm not sure if that really explains it. He wants to take it.
I think Ihita also wanted to comment on that.
Yes, thanks, Juliana. Yeah, so I just wanted to say that you can link up IoT and AI according to my perspective. So what I think is, for example, if you have sensors put on your body measuring your blood pressure or your blood pumping rate, or various sensors looking at different parts of your different functionalities of your body, then all this data goes to, let us say, a cloud or a platform or a server where all this data will be processed either in real time, let's say, and then insights are made out of these. So when the insights part, the prediction part, the analysis part, and eventually actuation part is where machine learning comes into play. And if we were to link, like I think, like Nicolas was talking about, how artificial intelligence could run on the devices itself, calling it a smart device. In IoT, there is a lot of resource constraints, like I mentioned, battery in terms of power consumption, in terms of storage overhead. So it makes it difficult. But if you were looking at any other smart device which allows for a lot of computation, then you can run machine learning and artificial intelligence or algorithms on it to do the processing, and also the device, the smart device itself does the actuation. So the instructions that you give it, based on the data it senses, it performs right there, then and there. So that's the that's what I think, is the relation between IoT and AI. And similarly, in terms of security, if I were to give any inputs, if your data that is being sensed by your sensors of the IoT device get corrupted, your database, data sets that you're using to train your machine learning models will get corrupted, eventually affecting the predictions or insights that you're bringing out of the models.
Thank you. And then Sávyo.
Thank you again for the question. I completely agree with you. There is a big intersection between the two areas. And by the way, the machine learning reinforces IoT in the point of view of usability. So if you have to go and operate manually one Internet of Things devices, it will lost a lot of potential for making life easier. But in the current moment, we still have, as the other panelists, so much resource constraint, and we have just a few applications like if this then that services or any simple configurations linking sensors and actuators for the home IoT or even for wearable devices like smartwatches and so on. This needs to be a concern, and this also goes into my point of local operation, because this gives more reliability, and it removes the inferences from the manufacturers. It keeps the inferences about your life in your local network with you. You can decide to put it to the cloud, but you can opt for it. This is not. It should be your option, not from the manufacturer, from the current IoT model. But yeah, I think that in a few years, when we have more computer power in the home IoT devices, we need to be prepared for this concern, and make also the device more secure for anyone who try to get unauthorized access to that device. Just can't. Thank you.
All right, thank you. I'm just gonna allow one more question from, let me see here in the list, Fred. You can unmute yourself and ask your question, and I would just ask, please to make it brief, so we can move on to the Mentimeter. Fred, are you there? All right, so I guess Fred, oh yeah, I see.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, yes, please go ahead.
Okay, thank you very much for the opportunity. So mine wouldn't be a question, but a little follow-up answer to what Ihita gave. I think Ihita explained it very clearly. So when you take the AI and the IoT in itself, it can actually stand separately in silos. There are instances where you will be able to bring them together, because when you take IoT in itself, we are talking about the embedded devices. So those embedded devices can be programmed to perform just one task, and the AI in itself, it's also like a software, an algorithm that you program, and that algorithm kind of analyzes some data, the test data that you are giving to it, and then once it does that, you do the test, and then you pass all the tests that you've assigned it, and you think your model is ready, then you can deploy that model onto a machine to do the analysis for you anytime that there is similar data coming to it. When you take the two instances and you are looking at IoT being scaled to be able to perform that same action on a very large scale, then you can apply AI to the IoT. And at that point, you get the IoT device to be able to perform a lot of analytics on the data that you are receiving from the AI, the embedded system or the IoT system. And that is where the AI comes into play. Then when you're looking at the security, I think the last speaker mentioned something, that is, he was talking about edge computing, where your data is resident on the local device that you are using, but you choose to sync it to the cloud. So it is also very important that that aspect is given to the users to decide whether they want to sync their data to the cloud or they do not want to sync it to the cloud. And that would be looking at the data privacy and security. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your comment, Fred. Since it was a comment, I'll just move on to the Mentimeter in the interest of time, but thank you very much for your considerations. I think they're very relevant to our discussion and have a lot to do with what we were talking about on the relationship between AI and privacy and security. So I've sent the link for the first Mentimeter activity on Zoom. We can also see, for those who are on site, there's a code in the screen. You can see it there. So you can go to www.menti.com and then just type in the code and you're going to access the same screen we're seeing here. So the first question that we have here is what are the best approaches to establish processes for meaningful public participation in the development of national AI policies in Africa? If you want to give us a little bit more of context on what the question means and what you're expecting as participation from the audience.
Yeah, I mean, when you look at, the current global discourses on AI ethics and AI development across the globe, they are mainly driven by multinational corporations and, researchers and activists from mainly global South countries. And we are saying that has to change. We need to see a global balance where all stakeholders are involved in these global development processes. But more especially, I think, in relation to this topic, we have been really, seeing a lack in, AI national policies in Africa, and we really don't know what could be the gaps there. And we're trying to understand, meaningful ways that we could promote public participation, particularly for all stakeholders in this process.
Thank you very much for the context. We have now a voting situation in which we have 7 points for develop a common ethical and AI and human-centered basis for AI. And the second place goes to prioritize and support research in AI. In order for us to continue the debate on this, I'm just going to invite anyone who has voted in this Mentimeter and wants to share their perspective to come to the floor, either by raising your hand on the chat or by just stepping to the microphone down here. So if you want to participate on this discussion on the approaches to establish processes for meaningful public participation on AI in Africa, just feel free to either comment, either raise your hand or come here to the floor. I'm going to allow like one person or maybe two, depending on the time. So I see that Nancy has her hand raised on Zoom. So Nancy, if you want to unmute yourself and give it the floor.
Thank you very much for the opportunity and greetings from Kenya. My question is, how are we factoring in the aspect of inclusion? What are we doing for youth with disabilities when we are talking about these emerging technologies? are we including them in our working groups? And how can we make these technologies accessible to them? Thank you.
Yeah, good question. I think your question has a lot to do with the development of human-centered AI, which is also one of the topics that we're discussing here, and the establishment of processes for meaningful public participation. So if anyone wants to comment on that, feel free to do so. You're good? Okay. All right.
Yeah, I mean, Nancy's question is really timely and important. And I think this is one of the key issues that we often really don't think about in terms of, policy development, particularly when we talk about how emerging technologies affect the society. So I think it's really high time that, policymakers start thinking about how we can develop inclusive policies to also cater for people with disability, or issues around accessibility there. So in terms of what is really happening, I'm not really quite in touch with any other policies that are speaking to issues around disability from where I come from, but I'm really happy to hear from what other participants think here.
All right. Okay, so I sent the link for the second Mentimeter. We have also same thing. So there's a link on the chat, and there's also the code here, so you can access it through the platform and just type in the code. So Nico, if you want to introduce the question.
Yes, because maybe you cannot see at the screen because it's really small. But which of the following scenarios do you think infers a higher risk at the level of AI bias for the future, and why? So here we have 4 different options, like multiple choice. The first one, the A, is skin color is biased in facial recognition. That is one of the things I mentioned in my talk at the beginning. So if you think that infers a higher risk, please mark on the Mentimeter. The second one, B, is AI is likely to show language bias and reinforce the existing prejudices. That is what I talked about, some chatbots recognizing women and men differently because different context. So that is underrepresented. So maybe that is a risk. So option C is overrepresentation of certain factors in the training data sets. This means there are factors that are overrepresented, so maybe are minorities that are not taken in account. And D, that is the last option, is extrapolate what is true of individuals to entire group. Like, for example, people with disabilities are a small group, so maybe from one region or the algorithm could identify some patterns from this group and assume that all the individuals of the group have the same characteristics, and then have some errors, right? And this algorithm. So we'll see. For now, we have D and C. So the most important are the overrepresentation or the extrapolation to individuals from the entire group. Choose C's. And someone put a comment there, all of them and the ramifications are extremely dangerous. It's like comparing 4 poison and which is a killer. And another one put C and D. So it seems that C and D, this underrepresentation or overrepresentation of the data is the most risky things for the audience. This source of other problems. Okay, maybe we could or have comments or continue to the next one.
Just a disclaimer, there's no right or wrong answer, right? The idea is for us to discuss these things. So who made the comment? All of them and their ramifications are extremely dangerous. It's like comparing 4 poisons. If that person wants to speak up, I would love to hear what you have to say about the topic. Guess it's somebody very shy.
Hi, actually, I wrote that.
Yeah, go ahead.
So I think it's like, yeah, as I wrote it, as simple as a poem, because like where you come from and the reason or like what you represent, the minority, the majority, like So like it's like that. It's everything related is dangerous. I think like you cannot just focus on one or A or B or C or D. So yeah, that's the point.
Okay.
If we don't have more questions, we could continue with the next one.
Oh, you got a question? Yeah. If you have a question, just feel free to go around the mic and ask.
Okay. So thank you very much for the presentation. In relation to what Nico mentioned about privacy and the discrimination, the artificial intelligence can sometimes be with aspects such as facial recognition. How can we ensure that the technology and tools used to collect data are adequate to unambiguously identify the user in order to promote respect and protect human rights?
Well, there are some, for example, practices that could ensure that this algorithm could include all the voices or all the representations of the populations. So these techniques are like adding more overrepresented data of the minority groups. That could be a solution. So if you have, for example, I don't know, someone with violet hair that maybe is not so common globally, then you need to add more data if you are talking about an image recognition system, or if you're talking about, I don't know, a density of the hair in your head. So you need to multiply the quantity of data from the minority groups, I think. And with the over-representation data is the same. So you need to remove some kind of this data from the majority groups, so to have more space for these smaller groups. That are some techniques that are used nowadays, and there are some standardization processes happening that aims to do this like a general thing, because if not, we will end with millions of different algorithms that are really biased.
Thank you for the question. Oh, you got a question. Yeah, feel free to come.
Hi all, it's great to be here. I'm David from United Nations Climate Change, and I actually listening to this with great interest, because a lot of the solutions can be applied to, or AI algorithms can be a part of the solution to adapt to climate change or to mitigate climate change. The question is now, we are in the Internet Governance Policy Forum. Is there, from the governance perspective, I see a little bit, we have a probable future, like if we just let corporations walk away with it and like don't have any privacy, but what would be the desirable future, and how do we get there? What are governance policy measures that could be put into place today on an international but also on a national level to bring us to a desirable future?
Yeah, great question.
Yeah, I mean, a possible scenario in this question that really comes to my mind is, from the positive side of it would be, a situation where we are able to use AI to assess and predict, the risks and damages related to climate change. In that case, by application of algorithms, which would then allow us to, assess the impact in the environment. That's just the closest I can really think about that. I'm not quite really, much knowledgeable in that area, but I'd really, like to pass it on to other colleagues here.
I mean, just stepping out of my role as moderator here, I really liked your question, because I think when we look at technologies such as AI and IoT, we always have to have in mind that this is human shaped, right? Technology does not develop by its own, it does not go on a path in which we cannot interfere. So in the same way that we sort of created this, we can also use it for our own good. So it is, we cannot look at AI and IoT from like a deterministic perspective and just say, okay, we cannot control that, so let's try to, I don't know, deal with the fact that this technology is just taking our data and maybe using it for purposes that are not in our benefit. So I think the fact that we're here in this forum already means that we acknowledge that we don't think this is the way forward. And I think an important thing that we can do in order to really use that for good purposes, especially when talking about the environmental cause, is just be aware that there might be biases, but you can try to think about good practice to mitigate them and engage in this policy discussions, and also in good corporate practices that exist and they're being developed year by year, because there are discussions happening, and yeah, we can shape it in the way that we want, if we want to. Yeah. So if you want to add to that, yeah. All right. So moving on to the third Mentimeter. Thank you, Nico. I already said the link. Yeah. So Nico, if you want to introduce the question.
Well, now again with artificial intelligence, what do you think is the best way to reduce this bias thing in machine learning algorithms, and why? And the options are: A, design AI models with inclusion in mind; B, perform targeted testing. This is test exactly these minority groups that you want to be included. And C is improve AI explainability. This is the way what the algorithm has decided and why, right? So if you improve explainability, you could, it's like the other 2 points. So you can have a sense of reduction in the bias.
All right, thank you, Nico. So we have already some comments here. So whoever wrote comments, if you want to share. Don't know who's snoring, but hope it's not my mic.
Where someone write a multifaceted strategy needs to implement it that would address all of the three, A, B, C. So
yeah,
people are...
Aaron has his hands raised. So Aaron, I'll give you the floor.
Yes, I hope you all can hear me.
Yeah, we can.
Okay, I was the one who wrote that multifaceted strategy. And the reason why I thought of that is I was reading the options, and in reading them, I was reminded of something I had read from the philosopher of ethics of artificial intelligence, Nick Bostrom. And one of the things he mentioned is that if we're to have AI being used, for example, in the public space, in roles that would, in the past, let's say 50 years ago or so, would have been filled by humans, then one of the requirements, the acceptable requirements, is that the system would have to satisfy the social requirements of that usage in the public space. And but a lot of these social situations and problems are very complex. And out of the three options that were mentioned there, given all of that, I would think that we would actually need to use all three of those at the very least in order to try to get at some of the problems that we've been having, leading to violation of human rights, discrimination, and so forth. And that's why I wrote a multifaceted strategy.
Thanks, Aaron. Couldn't agree more. I don't know if you have anyone else here. Yeah, I'll just send the link for the fourth one. Oh, okay, yeah.
Hi everyone. My name is Dana from Brazil. I'm a law student, and I was the one who picked ABC as well. I was wondering specifically about AI in the judicial making process. Well, where I come from, we do not use it for decision making, but I've been reading about some countries that do use it, and as the US, and they have really big problems with point number C, because sometimes states, they have the right to hire private companies that don't release how this analysis is being made, this analysis of data. And I was wondering if you guys have any input in how can we use AI in the decision-making process if it is possible to do it in a non-biased way, or the very least, if it is possible to do it just for assessing judges in a way that is not a threat for the victims or the people being accused of crimes. So yeah, that's my question, and thank you. Excuse me.
Thank you for the question. Nico?
Yes, I could answer. Well, I think there are two separate things, because decision-making processes are when the state wants to take some decision for the future of the country, or they need to realize how to proceed on something. This one thing, but for example, in a judge, when you have a judge there and you need to take a decision with all the information, maybe you have a crime or something, and you have the algorithm has photos, has a log, has the chats, and with all the information they need to decide. So this bias thing will appear in all of these things I mentioned. So at the end, it's a complex thing. I don't really heard of any judge or processes in the law using these algorithms now, but for sure it's something that we need to take in mind and explore to see how to, with these multidimensional things, we could deal with the bias thing.
Yeah, I mean, in addition to what you're saying as well, isn't it interesting that oftentimes when we talk about biased and discriminatory AI technologies, we often react after the incident has happened? Yeah. How about we then start addressing the issues at a product development level, where technology companies train their product and software developers about the importance of embedding ethical policies or practices in their product development, so that it saves us the time of having to be fighting these litigations in court. To me, it really doesn't make sense at all. And I think it speaks to the ignorance that big technology companies often lack this oversight in their product development. And I think it's our role as civil society to start speaking out about these issues. And that's just what I think.
Right. So hello, I'm from Poland and I'm a physics student. And as I understand, like always the bias on the artificial intelligence depend on the data, like the data selection. But actually, isn't like we always need some bias, let's say, but it's us who need to select the right data. So for example, the data that represent some human value. So we can speak about this human-centered artificial intelligence, because it's us who want this, for example, program act in the way that it's consistent with our values. So actually, we always need a biased, some kind of bias, but it's us who need to select this data, right?
That's an interesting question, actually. It's the same question you're asking is more or less like you as a white person developing a facial recognition technology that is going to identify me as a Black person, and that very same technology fails to identify my Black skin. So what I'm trying to say here is, I think product developers and people that feed these systems with data need to be cognizant of the inclusive aspect or element of it in how they train the algorithm. Yeah.
Yeah, can I just intrude? Sorry. I think the point that you brought is really interesting because, well, of course, if you put rubbish in, there's going to be rubbish out. That's the principle, right? But also the people who are assessing what's rubbish or not should also be aware of their own biases. So that's why one of the points that is most interesting in this discussion is that we should not only look at the data, but also the people who are assessing that data. So we need to include people who are part of minority groups also in the development process, also in the data analysis process, so that these people who are conscious of the biases that affect them can be able to intervene and well, basically get rid of them. But yeah, very good point. Thank you for bringing that up, and I'm passing.
So thank you. Thank you for the question. Actually, I'm not exactly the AI guy, but okay, come on. There is also one fundamental point in the point of view of AI that is not only in the training of AI, but what features, what aspects of one person, of one data you are taking into account. So for example, when you are trying to recognize one person, what should I look for? It's the way your face, the color of your skin, your hair, or something else. So we still don't know how to completely analyze a lot of things to use as a feature for classifying data and having inferences with AI algorithms. And this way, we still have biases in our decision of the points, but we still don't have a complete understanding of what should we take into account
on to the next Mentimeter activity. Nico, if you want to.
This one is just from Sávyo.
Yeah, I mean the screen. Yeah, thank you.
So thank you again. This question is to we build a word cloud, and I will. I need this feedback from you to understand as a device chair of the dynamic collision in Internet standard for security and safety. Vice chair of the IoT Security by Design working group in that dynamic collision. How can we address the type of operation, the problems around the operations of home IoT devices or other types of devices, wearables or smart cities and so on, but mostly in the home IoT. So how can we handle with the problems with this kind of things? And what is your main concern regarding this? Go ahead.
So, hello, I am a security specialist in IoT. Well, my main concern is about how we can use the same hardware, the same system in multiple services, because usually when you are dealing with this kind of technology, they are company related. So you need to use their systems and their infrastructure. So my main concern is about that. Like, oh, if I have the opportunity, if I bought this, can I change the system? Can I use it to my own interest at my own infrastructure, not depending on some company or some brand to be able to use this technology to in my house? Like, yeah, thanks.
So you mean something like the freedom to change the firmware of the device, or even updating my device, the hardware of my device?
Yeah, actually, not only that. Just if I want to keep the device exactly the same, but instead of sending to the servers, the company server, I can send it to another company or even to myself. So it's that matters the most to me. The possibility of selecting what system you will use to process this data.
Thank you. That's the point. You have the opportunity to choose to where the data is going. And as I mentioned, just one last comment on this point. As I mentioned, the DCI-OS, this is also one invite for everyone who is interested in cybersecurity topics. IoT security by design is only one of the topics. We have also procurement and digital education initiatives for cybersecurity. not only for IoT, but for sure I'm gonna take those points like the attack on hours. Maybe this comment was in the point of view this attack coming from the devices manufacturer and the excess of power also from the manufacturer. I think that it's it, but I hope we have a point.
Thank you. Does anyone want to add to that technical question? Well, we have 2 comments in the Mentimeter, so I guess if the people that added them want to speak up, feel free to do so. Otherwise, we move on to the next Mentimeter question, which is also from Sávyo. So if you want to.
So back to the point of changing the way we operate the IoT devices in our home. I have suggested some options on how to face this issue, like this other options, or keep the thing as it is. But the main point of this is the configurations. It's like, should we improve the user interface and the user experience while configuring a device, or outsourcing the security deployment for your ISP, for example, educating the end users to do a well configuration, or using plug and play protocol as UPnP, MDNS, or any other SPCP, or if we have any other suggestion. So please feel free.
We got one comment on educating users. Does the person, okay, more people now. If you want to step up, talk about it, feel free to do so. This is a forum, so you're very much invited to speak. We don't want this to be a lecture, so yeah. All right, so I guess if nobody wants to speak, we can move on to the next one. Yeah. So I just sent a link to the 6th one, which is from Ihita. So Ihita, if you want to introduce the question, please.
Yes, yeah. My question is about, like I'd mentioned previously, like one of the challenges with securing IoT devices was the fragmented standards that we have currently. So do you think it is required to have standards for security of IoT? So I'll just take up 2 quick questions, after which we can have a discussion on the next 2-3 ones we have. Great, thank you. If somebody would like to talk about why standards would be required, just to put in a perspective.
Yeah, Joel, go ahead.
Okay, hello again. I would like to argue that we need standards, including to the last question, because when you have these standards well known in the industry, the user will be able to understand, if they understand the functionality of one system, they will be able to use it in others too. So if you have these fragmented types of connections and systems, OSs, UXs, the user will need to learn everything from the basic again. So if you have standards also during the configuration process, the person would be able to learn how to configure one system to be able to configure others too. So yeah, that's it. Thank you.
Great. Any more comments?
Thank you.
Yeah, Ihita, if you want to have follow-up.
Yeah, I would just like to add to that. Yeah, I'd just like to add to that. I think those points, that's exactly what we're looking at, standards for security of IoT. And I think previously in the panel discussion, we mentioned digital skill sets and digital literacy. So bringing in standards will, these norms will make sure that even if you're not very well skilled with the devices still have baseline minimum security requirements so that it doesn't compromise or affect the functionality of the device, or something that people might not be aware of. So I think standards, that's one main thing, just like my friend just mentioned. So yes. If there are no more comments, can we move to the second question, since I think we're running out of time?
Yeah, we actually have one more question by Sarah. Sarah, I'll give you the floor, but please, if you can be very quick, because we need to wrap up.
Yeah, so I just wanted to add that we need to have standards, because if we don't, then we leave the security aspect to the developer or whoever is building a product, and that's not safe, which means we'll find ourselves again in a place where we are complaining that some of these things have not been catered for. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. I completely agree. Stepping out of my position as moderator again. We need to wrap up. So I'll give, 40 seconds for each one of you to for final remarks. And thank you already in advance for attending the session. Nico, please stop sharing your screen.
Well, I could say
Juliana, if I could just interfere.
Go ahead.
Please go ahead.
Yeah. Yeah, go ahead.
So this was just regarding the second question. I think we've answered the second question since we were talking about pros and cons. Yeah. Nicolas, please go ahead.
Yeah.
Okay, I just want to say that this is very interesting because in our session we touched on artificial intelligence at the same time as IoT. I really want that you don't be overwhelmed because of that. But our main idea was that to discuss these emerging technologies and from the youth perspectives, right? And yes, I think that we need to go for the AI. We need to go to the global standards, and people is the one that create these standards. So that for the AI. And for the IoT, I think we have several examples of different protocols that are being made from different standardization bodies like the IGF and the IEEE. For example, for the problem that you say, Joao, there are some protocols like the software update on the Internet of Things and the trusted execution environment protocols that are more with the manufacturer. So how to maintain this execution environment secure. So for example, when the sensor head starts, if they is not updated with the last security things from the manufacturer, then the only thing that this device can do is to update themselves. So just responding that there exists some kind of protocols that are being developed for these concerns.
And in closing, I would just say, we can't talk about the stability and security of emerging technologies without talking about policymakers and also the inclusion of other, different stakeholders, because that actually brings, the element of inclusivity in policymaking processes. And I think I'll just emphasize that.
Thank you. Yeah, I think you go first.
Hi. So as my closing remarks, I would like to say that, since we are all sitting at the Internet Governance Forum, which is a multi-stakeholder platform, all of us, and this session specifically, we're encouraging the young people to contribute to, the domains of artificial intelligence and IoT. So when we're talking about standards, I would personally also, and I'm sure the panelists would agree, that we want to encourage the young people as one of the key stakeholders to contribute to standardization mechanisms around the security of IoT and especially and also artificial intelligence. And it's important that there are lots of these organizations, for example, the ones with the European Union, the one, in India also we have a few, then we have NIST in the United States, and all of these organizations do open up for inputs. So from various stakeholders, so please make sure that, you are contributing through this process to eventually create very robust and inclusive and great standards for the emerging technologies.
Thank you.
Thank you. And I will be really fast because we are up on time. So about this topic on standardization, please join a session as I'm speaker tomorrow. I'm gonna talk about one security protocol that I'm proposing in the ITF for security management of IoT in home networks. About the AI and the IoT, I think that we really need to keep talking about that and the intersection in the join of this topic too. So that's it.
Thank you very much for the closing remarks, and also thank you for attending and actively participating in our session. Yeah. Have a great evening. Yeah.